Good afternoon. I'm Casey Loftman, Senior Editor for Defense News. Thank you for joining us for today's webcast, The Challenges of Government and Defense Industry Facility Security. My guests today are Mary Rose McCaffrey and Charlie Phelan. Mary Rose McCaffrey is former Director of Security for the CIA and former Vice President of Security for Northrop Grumman. She has also held senior security positions across the intelligence community, Department of Defense, and other government agencies. She is a member of the Board of Advisors for the Council on Intelligence Issues and is the president of the Cigna Society, a CIA retiree association. Charlie Phelan is the principal of C.S. Phelan and Associates. He has more than 5 decades of security experience in both government and industry, including serving as the first director of the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency and director of the National Background Investigations Bureau. He also held several other senior security roles in the government and is former vice president of corporate security for Northrop Grumman. Mary Rose, Charlie, thank you for joining me today.
We're glad to be here.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and get started. And Mary Rose, I'm going to direct this first question to you, but then I also want to hear from Charlie on it. And one of the big challenges of defense and defense industry facility security is compliance requirements. And with those requirements continually evolving, what are some things that security leaders should look for when they're planning to make sure their security programs are prepared to meet future requirements?
Thank you, Casey. So security leaders need to look for a number of things, but first they need to understand what their security requirements are. So requirements come in many forms. From a security standpoint, it depends upon the customer, and the customer usually has a set of requirements. You have internal requirements in terms of company requirements, building requirements, and programmatic requirements. And these requirements require the security leader to understand what those things are and what the why is for the corporation so that they make a business value to the corporation. And then in the why of that scenario, they can further inform and articulate to their leadership the value of the expense they're about to spend. In that scenario, it is all driven based upon the risk and the threat. And so although the requirements are the guidance, the risk and the threat may either raise or lower those requirements. And in each of these requirements, they have to understand before they actually write a word of a plan, what their customer wants, what their customer needs, what their company needs, and how they are going to execute in what period of time. So Charlie, you had some additional thoughts on that.
Sure. Mary Rose, to follow on that point, articulating the why is fundamental, and it's often overlooked in the rush to simply comply with the regulations. Important to understand why the customer established these rules, and 2 reasons lead to this, I think, as you pointed out. It is easier to explain to your boss why you need to either expand or create from new countermeasures. And even more importantly, as you are developing that countermeasures program, it gives you a better sense of what the possibilities might be if you understand precisely what it is that is causing this threat and elevating this risk. It's important to keep in mind that the threat scenarios that drive these risks are sometimes old, sometimes new, and constantly evolving. To the point, the old attack scenarios don't just go away when new attack scenarios appear. If you look back at trying to build embassies overseas in, say, Moscow in 1970s, the same challenge to protecting that construction site exists today when trying to build a new embassy someplace else in the world here. Secondly, if you look at a crowd gathering and what that might mean in front of the embassy in Tehran in 1975, how would that have matched with the crowd gathering in front of the consulate in Benghazi 40 years later? All of this is important to keep in mind that these problems just don't go away here. Last point on this thing, really, in order to understand this environment and its countermeasure, it is really important to build communications with your customers and, more importantly, with others in your business area here. There's many examples in the government and industry ecosystem about this thing. An interesting but very true fact, the CEOs of the various companies in this business, frankly, in any business area, don't go around sharing their proprietary and corporate strategies openly with their counterparts, with their competitor mates, I guess. But when you get into the security community, my experience has been over those 50 years is that the security community is more than welcome, more than willing to share threat and risk information across that spectrum, because we all understand and have understood for a long, long time that we are all suffering from and subject to the same level of threats and same kind of attack scenarios. And we all have to assume the same level of risk. So we're in this together, and the communications is absolutely important.
And Charlie, that's a really interesting point you made there at the end that I'd like to follow up on, which is, company A and company B may be competitors, so their CEOs would never dream of sharing information, but the security people talk. This is a close-knit community, and it really is a common good type of thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think it's very, very important to find those outlets to build those relationships. It's not just a one-on-one, pick up the phone and call somebody or try to hit them on a LinkedIn app or something. It is really attending the various organizational elements that have been set up and functioning for several years, whether it's ASIS or NCMS or AIA, NDIA, the support communities, have sessions annually or biannually where you can get together and meet people and build those relationships and make them very, very strong. And I will tell you, there are people that I've been working with literally for this 50 years that I'm still working with today because of those relationships.
And one of the other things there, Casey, from a standpoint of the relationships, many in the federal space often meet monthly. It's a small group of people, and they grew up together, and they're now leading organizations, and they meet monthly. And their industry colleagues do the same thing. So this is one of those things where team sports, there's no I in team. And security professionals, one threat is a threat to all.
And then, Mary Rose, we talked about compliance, and I have a question about that. As you go forward, you have your plans in place, you meet your compliance requirements to start, but then once you're in that ongoing operations phase, how do you make sure that you're remaining in compliance? What are some of those key warning signs to say, hey, we might have a compliance issue here, and then how can you address that?
So this is always my favorite part of the business. So everybody loves the new shiny objects. They build a beautiful new facility and they have beautiful new spaces. And then a year later, no one's tested alarms. No one's tested, the sensors. No one's tested, with any periodicity. So operations and maintenance, one, you have to do it with regularity. There are government requirements for annual assessments. There are testing requirements for sensors, alarms on a 30-day basis. The key is you have to depend upon the people running your security programs to actually do that job. So your job from an O&M standpoint is to, one, understand, are they doing that? Two, do they understand why they're doing that? And three, when you have what we used to call in the business a nuisance alarm, are you discounting it or are you actually investigating it? And if you are discounting it, that could lead you down a path that leads you to compliance failure. And so think of a huge campus on, a big campus or a big defense installation. You could have one sensor on a fence that isn't working. But if you have 10 sensors you're ignoring, you have a vulnerability that your customer is going to find. And it is always better to be forthright and tell your customer you have a problem and then come about a common solution to fix that problem versus your customer coming in. And we have all been in this situation where your customer comes in and says, you are unsatisfactory and we're going to give you a 90-day remediation to correct your behaviors. But it becomes, again, security is everyone's responsibility, not only the practitioners, but the programmatic people. If your program says, security, you just stay in the background, leave us alone, that's never going to work well. So I have always found that it is a team sport and it is everyone's responsibility. And it is always better when you have legions of people working for you to have them understand the why. And when they tell you they have a problem, don't shoot the messenger. I know lots of people who have been shot along the years, myself included. At the end of the day, you can only fix what you know. And if you pretend you don't know it, you're going to have a bigger problem at the back end.